Alright, good mythical morning. It's not morning at all. It's noon time. I've been sleeping extra long. It's been really nice. I'm on my 3rd day of fasting, so my energy is a little lower than usual. But anyways, I'm here. I'm not queer. Oh my god. Right, so in today's video, I have found this audiobook on YouTube and I'm loving it. I'm not finished yet, but I think it's really worth listening to. It's called The Courage to Be Disliked. Sorry, my organic tripod, which is my arm. It's gonna be going through a lot, so if you're being shifted around, that's why. Right, so I listened to this audiobook, The Courage to Be Disliked, and I found it really interesting if you're into psychology and you're curious about people like Jung and Freud and what they're talking about. Adler is like a very kind of Adlerian psychology is like a very kind of different twist, more like a metaphysical kind of version, a little bit in terms of, you know, the things that I'm learning about manifestation and things from that perspective seem to kind of be more closely connected to Adlerian psychology. I'm going to get into like an example, but right, so I wanted to kind of reflect on a few of the key insights that I've kind of gathered from there. I have some notes that I took while I was listening. I definitely wanted to buy it too and actually read it also. So I think one of the concepts that I found really interesting is he talks about superiority versus inferiority, and I've talked about this I think before. I'm gonna try to explain myself well, because I think it's a nuanced topic and I think it's easy to kind of be misinterpreted, which is fine, you know, if it gets misinterpreted. I think for the people that can kind of relate to it or that resonate with this, they're gonna understand anyways. So basically I think in terms of people have this kind of tendency of, because we live in a social environment, society, in groups, in communities, in like a town, whatever, you know, as much as I'm like 80% introverted, but I obviously still recognize that we live in social circumstances. And there's a lot of interesting points about that, but I'm just gonna go with the first one still that Adler brings up in terms of superiority versus inferiority. Jesus Christ. So I think everybody has the tendency to kind of sometimes sway between feeling good about yourself and obviously feeling not so good about yourself. And let's see if we can fix this focus thing. I think it's often related to comparison, even if you don't want to admit it for yourself. And it doesn't have to be this cliche kind of way of comparison of like, I'm trying to lose weight and I'm looking at this influencer who's posting her before and afters and she looks stunning now or whatever, for example. Am I telling myself? You know, I'm just kidding. So that you then sway between feeling like, oh, I'm doing really well compared to this arbitrary group, whatever is in your environment, whether it's also a digital environment, the things you're kind of exposing yourself to, or, you know, any other environment in terms of your school environment, for example, or like your little town that you live in, or like your friendship circle or whatever. So I think naturally our brain wants to kind of categorize whether, in comparison to the things that we know or the people that we're around or the successes that we see, are we doing good? Not even saying are we reaching the same successes, are we as good, but are we on a good path of doing that, on a good trajectory, or are we doing bad or worse than whatever it is, the environment, the, I don't know, the things you see, etc, etc. So I think it's less about some form of, I don't know, self-deprecation versus narcissism. I think it's way more about, it's way more about just our brain trying to categorize if we're on the right track and doing it by distinguishing from others. I don't know if that's Adler's point necessarily, but that's kind of what I gathered from it, because I had been thinking about that my brain does definitely do this, you know. Like I said, I've mentioned it already before. It's like, in terms of even how I got into my YouTube grind, thinking that like if everybody's stuck at home with this panini, then, you know, I'm gonna spend my time stuck at home the best that I can. And yes, I'm not saying it was like out of spite to the general masses or to the average or whatever, or out of thinking that I'm better than, but I do think to a certain extent, from your ego, which is the driver, to a large extent, it was kind of in that same frame of reference, even though I wouldn't categorize it as good or bad, to be honest. It's just the meaning that I associated to it. Anyway, that actually brings me perfectly to my next point, that Adler talks about kind of a different effect model of psychology, in terms of it's less about the cause was created, so then you experience the effect, but it's more like you experience the effect, so your brain thinks of a cause. So the example that he brings in that book is for example, is that there's this one guy in a cafe and he gets hot coffee spilled all over him, and immediately he jumps up and he shouts at the waiter and this and that, and you know, he's talking about or the guy in the book is talking about how, you know, it's not like the anger they used, the person used that anger to, like, it's not that they're immediately experiencing anger and they're just flying off the wall. It's more like that anger is a medium to get from point A to B. So in general, there's also very interesting aspects in terms of what the guy talks about of anger as a communication method. So you use anger to be heard, for example, and like the feeling that you're getting, that you're experiencing in terms of I was so mad and whatever, you are kind of creating that because of how you want to communicate. So it's not that the feeling comes up and you can't communicate anything else. It's more like the feeling comes up as a way to communicate in the way that you want to communicate that. I don't know if that makes enough sense. Definitely listen to the audiobook. I'm gonna probably put like a time span around what point in the video that was at. Actually, let me double check. I did take notes. I don't have great notes on this part, but yeah, instead of the kind of the perspective from Freud and Jung that is way more causal, that one thing happens and then you experience the next thing as like a chain. It's more like you're trying to get to point B, for example, express your frustration with a waiter, whatever, so you are creating the emotion that does it. And you know, if you look at it, communication in that way, it's way more easy to actually choose your state and choose your response, because you understand that it's just the feeling or the state is just the vehicle of how you want to get there. And then you have, I don't know if it's about having the awareness to choose better. But yeah, and then he was also talking in terms of anger about, it's usually like quite a, I don't want to say primitive, like a quite a immature way of responding, because you know, when you're a child and you're angry, why are you angry? It's probably because you're either really frustrated or you really want to be heard or whatever. But as an adult, you realize that you can make your point even if somebody spills boiling hot coffee. You're not gonna really help anything if you fly off the wall, or if you justify your anger that you're experiencing, that you're kind of creating under that model, to have that communication with, for example, that waiter. But instead, as an adult, you can actually know that you can just as well communicate with a waiter that you're frustrated and that I don't know, whatever, in a normal tone, and they're probably going to respond the same or, you know, better. So it's all about feelings, and like feelings in terms of communication as a vehicle to have better exchanges and yeah, less creating of unhealthy responses or justifying unhealthy states as a way of responding because of XYZ. And then another thing that he talks about in terms of anger is that obviously from that like stoic perspective, that anything that you allow externally to kind of influence you, to kind of make you step out of yourself kind of, and to react instead of respond, is, you know, not ideal. So if you look at anger as a communication strategy, or other unhealthy patterns, but anger is a really easy one I think to kind of relate to, then you can kind of rise above it. So you understand the person is not just angry, they're creating that anger for themselves in that moment because of the argument that they want to make, or the way that they want to feel about a situation. If you have, for example, a lot of anger towards, I don't know, a part of your family or whatever, it's, yeah, this is based on his perspective, it's way more about you want to experience that anger, so you create the state of being angry, or even the exchanges where anger comes up. Yeah, so that's what he said about that. I found that really interesting in terms of I think this is a really practical way of looking at these strong emotions as just communication tools for people to want to feel heard. And I think that makes it easier to rise above it and to not respond to it. And let me check the other points. It's nice here, right? The birds, it's really not great angles. It's really not giving for my face, but anyways, who cares? Oh, I did write it down. The anger as a communication strategy is around hour 2. So if you look at the audiobook on YouTube, if you go to, I think, literally hour 2 or like 1:55, then you should have this point. So I think that's really interesting. Then this is gonna just be a side note because I didn't take any great notes. Maybe I'll remember some stuff as I talk about it. He talks about friendship as being about distance and depth. So yeah, I'm not the best one to talk about this one specifically. So the next one that's really interesting about Adler's way of looking at things, I'm just going to read the note and then I'll talk about it. Separation of tasks. Don't intrude on other people's tasks. Even like forcing your child to do homework. Almost all interpersonal relationship struggles are caused by intruding on other people's tasks, or having your task intruded on. Tasks. Oh yeah, and I do have one more note about the last one. Good interpersonal relationships require a certain degree of distance. So about the separation of tasks, I think this was a really interesting concept, because I think what he's saying there is ringing really true, even though I don't think it's necessarily intuitive. So everybody in life has their own things that they need to do, whether that is like the example that I mentioned about children having to do their homework. By parents, for example, intruding on their task to do it, they take out the ownership and the responsibility of doing it, and they can kind of I'm not shitting on parents here specifically that force their kids to do homework. Like even when I was hearing it, I was like, oh, interesting point to consider, because I think I would have forced my kid to do homework. And now I'm like, I genuinely understand what he's talking about in terms of every person has their individual things that they just end up having to do. you know, whether it's like doing your homework prepares you in the end for being a independent learner or for being a good student or whatever. And I think by having parents that force you to do it, even though I can fully understand the perspective of the parent being like, yeah, but you know, I have to make sure that my child does it, otherwise it doesn't get done, or he just procrastinates it all day. But that is one of the life tasks of your child, to kind of learn these things. And if you're telling your kids to do it, then you are taking the full ownership of that task away from them. And in a bigger context, in terms of adult relationships and friendships and whatever, I think if you kind of look at every person has their own tasks in life, whether it's psychological, physical, you know, whatever it is, that you can encourage them. And that's kind of the point that he came to. You can encourage people to do better, but even giving praise or punishment or reward or punishment, like the school system does with his homework example, is really not so helpful, because it takes the ownership from them, and it kind of corrupts the purity of the life task to a certain extent. So imagine you are a child and your parents tell you to do this all the time. Even if you become really good, you didn't do it out of your own volition. You did it because you want to avoid punishment or you want to get this reward. But within yourself somewhere, as a fully sovereign individual, you know that you didn't do it out of your own intrinsic motivation or drive to be successful at whatever it is. So I don't know, to me that's really interesting, because I can really recognize, even though probably I was forced to do homework and stuff like this, I do think that took a little bit of the joy out of it. Like, maybe it would have taken me longer to get to being a responsible homework doer, but at least it would have been my decision, and I think I would have had my own process in figuring out how I want to do this, instead of being pushed to just do it. And yeah, in terms of interpersonal, like what he says, that all interpersonal struggles are kind of based on infringing on someone's life task versus getting your life task intruded on. And I can really understand that too, because yeah, it makes a lot of intrinsic sense to me that if everybody has their own responsibilities in life and their own things to have to figure out, then whether it is family or friendships or whatever, like, that's where the friendships, distance and depth kind of comes in. Like, even in relationships, in all kinds of relationships, if you have no distance, like, it's kind of like, how do you categorize your friendships or relationships in terms of how deep is it? Like, obviously you want a certain amount of depth, but also not like the full depth, like going to the, I don't know, lowest point or whatever, I guess, metaphorically, is not really possible either. So the same thing with kind of distance. Like, you want obviously a certain amount of closeness with your relationships, and at the same time you can't be like 100% connected. It just, you know, doesn't tend to work out for healthy relationships. So there also, it's very much about, I think, if you want to avoid certain conflicts, or even certain ways that you're projecting conflict onto a situation that may actually not have this real conflict, I think it's easy to understand in terms of, is this my task or is this their task? And if it's their task, then we're only going to create a struggle or an issue in the relationship if I'm infringing on their task, because ultimately, whatever it is, whether it's being on time or this and that, it's always up to the other person to figure it out. And by intruding on their task and telling them, like, I hate when you're always late, and like, stop doing that or whatever, like, you can be very, very valid in that argument. However, is it going to help, or is it going to create a struggle in the dynamic? Most likely the latter. So if you can start like integrating that perspective of looking at interpersonal conflicts or dynamics through the lens of, is this my task or is this their task? There may also be the opposite, and for example, if somebody was always late, and that it's your task to become more flexible or to communicate more effectively so that you're not ending up waiting around on people, for example. Or yeah, like I said, being more flexible, that you understand a certain friend is a little bit more like this, and it's not your life task to make them this different kind of person. It's their life task for themselves. So just taking a complete step back to the realization that it's not your task, and by intruding on their task, you are doing a disservice to the relationship. So yeah, that was another one I think that can help to kind of calm the reactive mind and bring more responsiveness, like responding from a calmer, more higher awareness, not in terms of as compared to the other person, but for yourself, higher awareness kind of perspective, to take yourself out of the responding, the reactive mindset. So yes, you can give encouragement, but reward and punishments are manipulations, and they also establish a hierarchy. Same in school. For example, if you have a teacher that rewards or punishes you, even though reward feels good, and you know, there's a lot of examples of rewards working, I think, but encouragement is way more ideal in terms of not putting yourself as above the other person, even with your own kids or whatever. Instead of rewarding or punishing them, focusing on encouraging them to make their own choices and to make the good choices so that they can feel good about it, and not taking any ownership away from them by giving them rewards or punishments over pursuing their own life tasks by themselves and getting the full, I want to say reward internally, but I don't know if it's about that. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not finished with the book, as I said, and I think I'm gonna reread it and actually take more notes. But yeah, found it an interesting perspective as somebody who's like I said, balls deep in YouTube psychology. I haven't heard that much about him. I haven't heard it explained as well, and it's a really nice kind of format of book. It's like this conversation between a philosopher and like a young man that is just, you know, I guess struggling with life, but maybe struggling would be too harsh. He's just thinking about life in terms of his own life, and the philosopher is kind of taking him through these concepts and explaining them to him, and yeah, the guy is integrating it and thinking about it and reacting to it, and I think it's really well written, and it's really nice to listen to. Yeah, that's it for this video. I will upload later, and yeah, wish me good luck on my continued fast. Day 3, I think I'm going to day 5, but we'll see.